Hi friends, and welcome to today's story. Wherever you are bundled up in bed, sipping tea by a window, or just taking a moment for yourself, I'm so glad you're here. This is a gentle tale for everyone, no matter your age. It's filled with warmth, kindness, and just a little bit of wonder. Today's story is called The Most Interesting Job in the World. So, take a deep breath, get cozy, and let's begin. In the quiet town of Maplewood, where the houses had flower boxes under every window and the streets smelled like cinnamon and pine needles, there lived a man named Eliot. Eliot was not famous. He didn't drive a fancy car or wear shiny shoes. He wore old sweaters with patches on the elbows and always had a few crumbs in his beard from his morning scone. But in Maplewood, everyone knew Eliot, and everyone said the same thing. He has the most interesting job in the world. Now, if you walked past Eliot's little cottage, the one with the green shutters and the wind chimes made of teacups, you might not guess what he did for a living. You might think he was a gardener, with the way his tulips always stood tall and proud. Or maybe a baker, since his front porch always smelled like vanilla and honey. But Eliot's job was something a little different. He was a letter listener. Every day, Eliot sat at his wooden desk beside the window with a cup of lemon tea, and he opened letters not for himself, but for the town. Not mail exactly, but lost thoughts, forgotten words, messages that hadn't found their way. People in Maplewood would leave notes in the hollow tree near the post office, notes they didn't know how to send. Some were written to old friends, some to the sky, some to no one in particular. Eliot read them, gently, and then he replied, in his own way. Sometimes he replied with a story told at the bakery, sometimes with a chalk drawing outside the schoolhouse. Other times, he whispered an answer into the wind, knowing it would land where it was needed. No one ever asked why Eliot did it. It just felt right, like rain falling softly on thirsty soil. One morning, just as the sun painted golden light across the garden, Eliot found something different in the hollow tree. It wasn't a letter. It was a drawing, a bright yellow crayon sketch of a girl with two braids and a lopsided smile. Beside it, in blocky handwriting, were the words, "What is the most interesting job in the world?" Molly, age 9. Eliot smiled. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. That question, he thought, deserved a very special answer. And so, with the sun warming the earth and the robins singing their soft morning song, Eliot decided it was time to tell his story. Eliot took out his old notebook, the one with the leather cover and pages that smelled faintly of lavender. It had traveled everywhere with him. Every story, every whisper, every reply he'd ever crafted for the town was scribbled inside in neat, sloping letters. He placed Molly's yellow crayon drawing on the first empty page. Then he began to write, not with answers, but with memories. He remembered when he first discovered his strange gift. He had been no older than Molly, sitting in his grandmother's attic, surrounded by dusty trunks and sunlight filtered through lace curtains. One day, he heard something, a soft voice, not outside his head, but not quite inside either. It was a feeling more than a sound, a question left hanging in the air, needing someone to catch it. So he wrote a response. And that's how it began. As he grew older, Eliot started hearing more of these invisible questions, from people who walked by without speaking, from children who stared at the stars too long, from hearts that ached but didn't know how to speak aloud. He realized that thoughts sometimes got lost, especially the quiet, tender ones, and that maybe someone needed to find them. In Maplewood, people came to trust that Eliot heard what wasn't spoken. He never pried, never asked. He simply listened. There was the time Mrs. Bell forgot the words to the lullaby she used to sing to her baby. Eliot hummed it as he passed her garden gate. She smiled. She remembered. Or when the librarian, who hadn't laughed in weeks, found a note inside her favorite book that said, "You're still someone's favorite story." She never asked who put it there. She just held it close. Eliot's work wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. But it mattered. Now, as he looked at Molly's question, he wondered how to explain something that wasn't quite a job, but a calling. Something that couldn't be found in a newspaper listing or on a signpost, something that was simply chosen by the heart. He decided not to answer her right away. Instead, he wrote her a letter. The next day, tucked into the hollow tree, Molly found an envelope with her name in soft cursive. Inside was a short note, and a map hand-drawn and decorated with tiny stars, trees, and winding paths. The note read, "To find the most interesting job in the world, you must follow this map, but go slowly, stop often, and listen, especially to things that don't have voices. E." Molly's eyes lit up. She clutched the note and ran home, her braids flying behind her. Eliot smiled from his window. He watched the clouds drift slowly above Maplewood and felt the wind brushing gently through the trees. Something wonderful had begun. Molly followed the map the very next morning. The paper felt soft in her hand, worn around the edges like it had been waiting a long time for someone to hold it. She started at the post office, just like Eliot's map showed, where the hollow tree stood proudly in the sunlight. From there, the map led her down winding stone paths, past cheerful houses with crooked chimneys and tidy porches lined with rocking chairs. She stopped often, just like the letter had said. First, she paused by the bakery, where the air smelled of cinnamon and orange peel. Mr. Petrov, the baker, was humming a tune she didn't recognize. She smiled and listened. It made her heart feel light. Next, she passed the little bridge that crossed Maple Creek. Beneath it, frogs chirped and water trickled softly over smooth stones. Molly sat on the edge for a moment and dipped her fingers in. The cold water tickled her skin. On the other side of the bridge was a garden bench. No one sat there, but a red scarf was draped across the backrest, as if someone had just left. A note was tucked beneath it. Molly peeked. The note read, "I'm thinking of you today." She felt something stir in her chest. Not sadness, not happiness, but something quiet and deep. She didn't take the note. She just sat with it for a while, and then moved on. The map led her through the schoolyard, now empty and golden in the afternoon light, and up a gentle hill, where wildflowers swayed like they were whispering to each other. At the very top stood Eliot's cottage. Molly hesitated, but the door creaked open before she could knock. Eliot stood there, holding 2 mugs of warm vanilla milk. "I thought you might stop by," he said, smiling. They sat in the garden together, where bees hummed lazily, and the breeze carried the smell of lemon balm. Eliot didn't speak much at first, and neither did Molly. She simply watched him, how he listened when birds chirped, how he noticed the clouds shifting overhead, how he smiled at nothing in particular. "Is this the most interesting job in the world?" she asked at last. Eliot looked at her kindly. "I think the most interesting job in the world," he said, "is learning how to hear what others cannot say, and helping them feel heard anyway, whether through words, kindness, or simply being near." Molly thought about that for a long time, and then, very quietly, she said, "I think I'd like that job too." Eliot nodded. "Then it's yours." The days grew longer as spring tiptoed softly into Maplewood. Blossoms opened like shy smiles, bees busied themselves in the lavender, and the sky turned a deeper kind of blue. Molly came to Eliot's cottage almost every afternoon now. She brought her own little notebook plain on the outside, but inside were bright crayon scribbles and questions only a child would think to ask. Do trees remember? What happens to wishes that don't come true? Can a smile be sent in a letter? Eliot never answered directly. Sometimes, he'd read her a story. Other times, he'd give her a task to draw a picture on the chalkboard outside the library, or leave wildflowers on someone's porch. Bit by bit, Molly began to understand that listening wasn't just with your ears. One morning, Eliot wasn't sitting by the window. His teacup sat untouched, the wind chimes were quiet, and the door remained closed. A note was pinned to the gate. "Gone for a walk. Today, Maplewood needs you." So Molly set out with her notebook and her eyes wide open. She helped Mrs. Bell carry her groceries, even though the bag was heavy and made her arms ache. She stopped by the hollow tree and left a folded paper that read, "You matter, even when you don't feel it." She left a lemon cookie on the school bench with a smiley face drawn in frosting. No one saw her doing any of this, but somehow, They felt it. Later that day, Eliot returned. He didn't say much. He just gave Molly a nod and a warm cookie of her own. That evening, as the two of them sat in the garden, watching the stars peek through the branches, Molly asked one final question. "Do you think I'm doing it right?" Eliot leaned back in his chair. "There's no right way," he said gently. "Only a kind way." Molly smiled. She opened her notebook and wrote those words down in bright blue crayon. Her pages were full now, not with answers, but with ideas, thoughts, quiet acts of love. And from that day on, two letter listeners lived in Maplewood. One wore old sweaters and smelled like lemon tea. The other wore overalls and always had crayon on her fingers. Together, they reminded the town softly, kindly, that the most interesting job in the world wasn't about traveling far or making big changes. It was about noticing, about caring, about answering the questions no one asked out loud. And that made all the difference. Thank you for listening, dear friend. If this story brought you even a moment of peace or a small smile, I hope you'll like the video, subscribe for more cozy tales, and share it with someone who needs a little warmth today. Until next time, keep listening gently. There's magic in every quiet corner of the world. Kiki.